She refused the Alpha King's crown, so he gave up his throne to win her love instead. Seraphina Voss had lived alone in the Montana mountains for 3 years, and she had grown to love the silence. Every morning, she woke before the sun, pulled on her boots, grabbed her notebook, and walked into the forest to track the wolf pack she had spent the last 2 years studying. The trees were her office, the cold air was her companion, the wolves, distant and free, were the only creatures she fully trusted. She was not unhappy, she was careful, and there is a difference. A bad relationship years earlier had taught her that lesson the hard way. The man she had once loved had made her feel small, had spoken over her, had treated her choices like suggestions he could simply ignore. When she finally left, she promised herself something. She would never again let anyone decide her life for her. Not a man, not a job, not a city. She packed her bags, applied for a research grant, and drove north until the roads got quiet. That is where her story, the real one, began. It was a Tuesday evening in October when she first saw him. She was crouched near a frozen creek, writing notes about paw prints in the mud, when she noticed a figure at the edge of the tree line. He was tall and still, watching her the way a person watches something they recognize but cannot name. Most people who wandered near her research area were lost hikers or curious campers. She stood up and called out to him. "You are about 40 meters from a protected habitat zone," she said. "I would appreciate it if you stayed back." He stepped forward instead. Not aggressively, slowly, the way someone moves when they want to show they mean no harm. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. He wore a plain coat and no expression of apology. "My name is Callum," he said. "I know I'm on your research land. I came here on purpose." She stared at him. "Why?" He hesitated, just for a moment, which she would later remember as the most honest thing about him. "Because you are here," he said, "and I have been looking for you for a long time." Seraphina was not a woman who frightened easily. She had camped alone through bear country, had navigated blizzards with nothing but a compass and a good pair of gloves, had sat across from funding committees who told her her work was not worth supporting. She did not run from Callum that evening, but she did not invite him to stay either. She told him her camp closed at dark, and she watched him go. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time, he brought no gifts, made no grand speeches, asked for nothing. He simply appeared at the edge of the trees, waited to see if she would send him away, and when she did not, he walked a little closer. By the 5th visit, they were sitting on opposite sides of her campfire, drinking coffee from tin cups, talking about wolves. He knew things she had not expected him to know, not from books. His knowledge had the texture of experience, of something lived rather than studied. He spoke about pack dynamics the way someone speaks about a family they grew up in. She asked him once where he had learned all of it. He looked into the fire for a moment and said, "From my father. He taught me that the strongest one in any group is not the one who forces others to follow. It is the one that everyone chooses to follow." Something about those words stayed with her long after he left that night. 3 weeks into their strange and quiet friendship, Callum told her the truth. He did not ease into it or wrap it in comfortable language. He sat across from her on a cold afternoon, looked her in the eye, and told her that he was the Alpha King, the leader of a hidden community of people whose bloodline carried traits that set them apart from ordinary human society. A world that had existed quietly alongside the one she knew, governed by its own laws, its own history, its own sense of duty. Seraphina sat with this information for a long time. "And you came here because of some kind of destiny?" she asked. "Because of a bond," he said. "One that cannot be created or forced, one that simply is." "And what does that mean for me?" she asked. "It means," he said carefully, "that my community expects you to come back with me. To be recognized, to accept a role beside me." She looked at him for a long time, then she nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in the way a person nods when they are filing something away to think about later. She picked up her notebook and went back to work. She did not say yes, she did not say no, she said, "I will think about it." What she thought about, mostly, was the word expects. She had spent years building a life in which no one expected anything of her that she had not first agreed to. The idea of being carried into someone else's world and placed into a role, no matter how grand, felt like the old life she had driven away from. It felt like being spoken over. 2 days later, Callum brought her to the Drevaine estate. It was a large, old property set into the hills, surrounded by forest, busy with people who moved with a quiet authority she had not seen before. She was introduced to an elder council, 7 serious people who looked at her the way judges look at a case they have already decided. They showed her the Queen's circlet. It was a simple and beautiful thing, silver and understated, clearly old. One of the elders placed it on the table in front of her and spoke at length about duty, about lineage, about what it meant for both their communities. Seraphina listened to every word. She let the silence sit after they finished. Then she reached out, picked up the circlet carefully with both hands, set it back in the center of the table, pushed her chair back, and stood up. "Thank you," she said, with complete sincerity. "This is clearly something important to all of you, but I cannot accept a title I did not choose. I am not refusing the people in this room. I am refusing an arrangement." Then she walked out. No one stopped her. Callum, sitting at the far end of the table, said nothing. He watched her go with an expression that nobody in that room could quite read. The council met without her the following morning. They told Callum it was a problem. They told him it was unprecedented. They told him that a queen who would not accept the crown was not a queen at all, and that the community needed stability, needed clarity, needed him to make a different choice. Callum listened to all of it. He was good at listening. It was one of the things that had made him an effective leader. He heard every argument, acknowledged every concern, and thanked each elder for their counsel. Then he went home, sat alone for 2 full days, and made a decision. On the morning of the 3rd day, he called the Grand Council together a second time. He stood at the head of the room, and he spoke clearly and without drama. He was stepping down as Alpha King. His brother Elias would take the role at the next full moon. The transition would be handled properly, with full respect for every tradition. He would assist Elias in any way that was needed, but he would not continue as king. The elders asked him why. "Because I have led this community for 6 years," he said, "and I have never once made a decision for myself. This is the first one." He drove back to the mountains that same afternoon. He found Seraphina at her research station, sitting at a folding table in the cold, entering data into a laptop. She looked up when she heard his car. He got out wearing a plain sweater and old boots. No ring, no guard, nothing to signal who he had been 2 hours ago. "Can I come in?" he asked. She studied him for a long moment. Something in the way he stood was different. The careful dignity was still there, but the weight beneath it, the kind of weight that comes with being responsible for many people, was gone. He looked, she thought, like someone who had just put down something very heavy. She moved her bag off the second chair. They talked for 4 hours that afternoon. He told her what he had done, without any expectation that it would change her mind. He told her he was not there to convince her of anything. He told her that for the first time in a very long time, he did not know what came next, and surprisingly, he was not afraid of that. "You didn't have to give it up," she said. "I know," he said. "I did it anyway." She looked at him for a long time. "Why?" He thought about this carefully before answering. "Because you were right. You told me that you would not be someone's destiny, that you would only be someone's choice. And I realized that I had spent my entire life doing things because I was supposed to. I had never chosen anything, so I wanted to try. What followed was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real. They spent weeks learning each other the slow way. They disagreed often. Callum had spent years making decisions alone, and he had the habit of certainty that comes with authority. Seraphina had spent years protecting her independence, and she had the habit of distance that comes with old hurt. They bumped against each other's edges regularly, and they learned to say so instead of pulling away. He joined her research work, partly because he genuinely found it interesting, and partly because it was the only way to spend time with her on ground she trusted. He turned out to be useful, patient in the field, observant, good at staying still for long periods. The wolves, over time, did not seem to mind him. One evening in early winter, a group of people from a rival community arrived on the edge of her land. They had heard about Callum's abdication and saw it as an opening for trouble. The situation was tense and moved quickly. Callum placed himself between Seraphina and the confrontation without being asked. He did not fight. He spoke, calmly, directly, with the kind of quiet authority that does not need a crown behind it. The group left. That night, sitting by the fire, Seraphina looked at him differently than she had before. She had seen powerful men perform their power. What she had seen that evening was something quieter and more solid. A man who knew who he was, with or without a title to prove it. She reached over and took his hand. She did not say anything. She did not need to. They married the following spring. There was no ceremony in a grand hall, no crown, no council watching. They stood in the forest where they had first met, under the same trees, with Seraphina's sister and Callum's brother Elias as witnesses. She wore a dress she had chosen herself. He wore the same plain boots from the day he had driven back to find her. Elias ruled the community well. He was steady and fair, and occasionally called his brother for advice. Callum always gave it honestly. But he did not miss the throne. He had discovered something he had not known he was looking for, a life that belonged to him, not to a role. Seraphina's wolf pack grew by 3 new pups that spring. She documented every one of them. Callum sat beside her in the cold, and passed her the notebook when her hands were too stiff to hold it, and she passed him the coffee when his were. It was not the life anyone had planned for either of them. It was smaller in some ways, and larger in others. It had no audience, no ceremony, and no crown. It had, instead, 2 people who had chosen each other freely, not because fate said so, not because a council approved, but because on an ordinary Tuesday in the Montana mountains, one of them had asked to come in, and the other had moved her bag off the second chair. That, in the end, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.